There are 10 commandments. 9 of them arrive with no explanation attached. One of them comes carrying a promise, and that detail is worth stopping on before anything else. The 5th commandment, as it reads in Exodus 20, goes like this: Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Long life. Continued possession of land. Those are not small rewards. But here is the question that most readers never think to ask. Who was the commandment actually written for? Not children, not in any meaningful sense. Think about what the promise assumes. It assumes someone old enough to worry about the years ahead of them. It assumes someone who has land to lose, or land coming to them, or a family plot they'd leave to their children someday. A 7-year-old has none of those things and cares about none of them. A 7-year-old does not lie awake calculating whether they'll still be alive in 40 years. Whatever this promise is doing, it is aimed at someone for whom the math of a life already means something. And that reframes the commandment entirely. Because the people standing at the base of that mountain were adults. They were herders with flocks, heads of households, men and women who had walked out of Egypt with elderly parents leaning on their arms the whole way. They had land promised to them that they had never set foot on. They could imagine losing it. Scholars who study this text as a legal collection have made this point for a long time. The other 9 commandments also assume adults. Children do not generally carve idols, plot murders, commit adultery, or give false testimony in a property dispute. The whole list is addressed to people old enough to do real damage. The 5th one is no different. Hit like right now and subscribe to the channel. Then tell me in the comments. Is there something about how you were raised that only made sense to you later as an adult? I will read every answer. Which is why the Hebrew underneath our English word honor changes everything once you see it. The word is kabad, and the root of that word carries a very physical idea. Heaviness, mass, density, something you cannot casually push aside. When Genesis describes a famine as severe, this is the root doing that work. The hunger was heavy. When Moses tries to talk his way out of the burning bush by saying he is not a good speaker, the Hebrew literally calls him heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. When Pharaoh's heart refuses to let Israel go, the text describes that heart as weighed down, immovable. The same 3 letters show up when the priest Eli falls backward off his seat and dies. Samuel's account tells us he was old and heavy, and that is the same root working as a simple physical description. No metaphor, just mass, but those same 3 letters give Hebrew its word for glory. Kavod. God's glory is his weight, his substance, the sheer fairness of him. When Israel described the divine presence filling the tabernacle, this was the vocabulary they reached for. Something so real it presses on the room. Something you cannot pretend is not there. So the 5th commandment borrows the vocabulary Israel used for the presence of God and points it at 2 people you probably argued with over dinner. Give your father and your mother weight. Treat them as substantial. Let them count for something in how you speak, in the decisions you make, in where your money goes. Now look at what sits on the other side of that scale. The opposite of kabad in Hebrew is kalal, a verb meaning to be light, to be slight, to be trivial, to make weightless. And kalal is the word Exodus uses 1 chapter after the commandment itself, in the line that stopped ancient readers cold. Whoever curses his father or his mother shall be put to death. Our word curse makes it sound loud and violent. The Hebrew is quieter than that, colder. It means to treat a person as nothing, to make them light enough to blow away. 2 pans on one scale, heavy on one side, weightless on the other. The commandment tells you which side to load. This is also why the 5th commandment cannot simply be swapped out for the word obey. Hebrew has perfectly good vocabulary for listening and obeying. The 10 commandments do not reach for it here. Paul, writing to the church at Ephesus centuries later, keeps the 2 ideas apart in the same paragraph. First he says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Then he shifts and quotes the commandment itself. Honor your father and mother. Obedience belongs to the season when you are under their roof and under their care. Honor never expires. A 40-year-old does not owe her mother obedience about which job to take. She owes her weight. What did that weight look like in an actual Israelite village? Strip out everything modern. No pension, no retirement account, no assisted living facility with a phone number to call. In the ancient world, an old person survived because their adult children fed them. That was the entire system. Grown sons and daughters were the safety net, and there was no second one underneath. Legal documents from across the ancient Near East make this visible. Contracts spelling out which child owes food, oil, wool, and shelter to an aging parent. Adoption agreements created specifically so a couple with no children would have someone obligated to care for them when they could no longer work. Honoring a parent was less a feeling than an economy. The obligation did not stop at the grave either. An adult child was expected to bury a parent with dignity, maintain the family tomb, and carry the name forward. Abraham buys a cave at Machpelah so Sarah can be laid to rest in ground he owns. Jacob makes his sons swear they will carry his body out of Egypt and bury him with his fathers. Joseph honors that oath at enormous cost, leading a funeral procession from the Nile all the way to Hebron. That is the fifth commandment operating before anyone ever wrote it down. Land, burial, name, and the care of the old were one braided thing in Israelite life. Pull out any strand and the household unravels, which is why Proverbs keep circling back to old age specifically. Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. That second half is the pressure point. Nobody despises a healthy, capable, contributing mother. The temptation arrives later, when she is confused, when she repeats herself, when she needs help standing up. When caring for her costs you time and money you would rather spend somewhere else. Proverbs is not gentle about the person who gives in to that temptation. Ancient Israel considered contempt for a parent a threat to the whole community, because a society that discards its elderly has already decided that people are worth only what they can produce. Share this video with someone who is carrying the weight of caring for an aging parent right now. And stay with me, because what comes next puts the whole commandment somewhere you probably did not expect to find it. There is a passage in Leviticus 19 that most readers walk right past. The chapter opens with God telling Israel to be holy because He is holy. Then comes the very first specific instruction in that chapter, and it is a two-part sentence joined in a single breath. Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Two commands side by side, reverence for parents, keeping the Sabbath. One is about people, one is about time set apart for God. And they open the definition of what a holy life looks like together. Notice also the order of the names. Mother first. In a culture that almost always said father first and does say father first in Exodus 20, Leviticus reverses it. Ancient Jewish commentary noticed this reversal long ago and read it as deliberate balance. Neither parent outranks the other in the claim they have on you. The pairing with the Sabbath is not random. Both commands ask you to stop and give weight to something that is not producing anything for you at the moment. Sabbath rest interrupts your work. An aging parent interrupts your schedule. Both ask whether you can honor what does not pay you back this week. Ancient Jewish tradition went further and grouped the fifth commandment with the first four, the ones about God directly, rather than with the five about human relationships. It looks like a filing error until you read why. How you treat the two people who gave you life is somehow bound up with how you treat the one who gave it through them. The fifth commandment sits at the seam, holding both sides of the 10 together. Jesus takes the commandment somewhere uncomfortable, and it happens during an argument that sounds at first like it is about hand-washing. Religious teachers had come to question why his disciples ate without the ceremonial rinse their tradition required. He answers by turning a different practice over in the light. He describes a custom called korban, a word for a gift dedicated to God, an offering consecrated to the temple. The practice worked like this. A man could declare his assets or his income set apart. And once he had made that declaration, those resources were off limits for ordinary use, including the ordinary use of feeding his elderly parents. He did not have to hand the money over to the temple immediately. He simply had to say the word. And with one religious formula, the obligation to his father and mother evaporated, while the wealth largely stayed in his hands. Before Jesus ever mentions parents, he quotes Isaiah at these men. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. Honor. The same word, aimed at God. Then he shows them a practice that strips honor from a father and mother. Two failures, one word connecting them. Weightless worship on one side, weightless parents on the other. Lips producing the right sounds while the substance has quietly drained out of everything. He does not soften what he says next. He quotes Moses, "Honor your father and mother." Then he quotes the companion text about anyone who speaks contemptuously of a parent. Then he tells them plainly, "You have a fine way of rejecting the commandment of God in order to establish your tradition." And the accusation only lands if honoring a father and mother means supporting them materially. Jesus is not complaining that these men were rude or forgot to call. The charge is financial. Money that should have gone to feeding an aging couple was rerouted through a religious formula. He puts a price tag on the word honor. Paul says the same thing without softening it in a letter to Timothy. Anyone who refuses to provide for their own household has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Early Christians understood that caring for your parents was part of what it meant to follow Jesus, and that skipping it while staying religious was a contradiction serious enough to name out loud. The Corban story cuts deeper than ordinary hypocrisy. These men had found a way to use devotion to God as their reason for abandoning a parent. Nobody was sneaking around the commandment. They climbed over it on a ladder built entirely from religious language. That is the part worth carrying home. It is possible to be busy with holy things and use that busyness as the reason the phone call never gets made and the help never arrives. Malachi, centuries before that argument in Galilee, aimed the same commandment upward at a nation. God is speaking to priests whose worship had gone sloppy, who were bringing blind and lame animals, offerings they would not have handed to a governor, and he makes his case with a household comparison. A son honors his father and a servant his master. If then I am a father, where is my honor? That is kabod again, the wait word. God is asking Israel to apply their own family standard to him. You know what it looks like for a son to give his father weight. So where is mine? The argument only works because everyone listening already agreed that a father deserves honor. That assumption is so settled, so deep in the bones of the culture, that God can build an entire indictment on top of it. Which quietly answers the question people ask about why a household rule sits alongside prohibitions against idolatry and murder. Because the family is where a person first learns what honor even feels like. Long before you can think about God as Father, you are learning what it means for another person to be substantial. What it means for someone to matter when they cannot do a thing for you. A child who learns wait at home has a category ready when God introduces himself. Get that wrong and something in the wiring crosses early. One moment near the end of John's account reads differently once you have spent time with this commandment. Jesus is on the cross. He is hours from death, suffocating slowly, carrying the weight of the world's sin. Below him stands a small group, and among them is his mother. He looks at her. Then he looks at the disciple standing beside her. Woman, behold your son. And to the disciple, behold your mother. John adds the detail quietly. From that hour the disciple took her into his own home. It was not a sentiment, it was a transfer of responsibility. Mary was almost certainly a widow by then. In that world, a widow without a son to support her was one bad season from destitution. Jesus, the oldest, was about to be gone. So in agony, minutes from dying, he arranged her care. He made sure his mother would eat. The Son of God kept the fifth commandment with some of his last coherent words. So what does giving weight look like on a Tuesday? Start with speech, because contempt almost always surfaces there first. The way you talk about your parents when they are not in the room says more than the way you talk to them when they are. Complaint is human and sometimes necessary. There is a real difference between telling a trusted friend you are struggling and turning your father into a running joke. One is honesty. The other slowly makes a person weightless, which is precisely what the Hebrew warns against. Then there is money and time, the part Jesus made unavoidable. For some of you that means writing a check. For others it means the harder currency, driving across town on a free afternoon you would rather have kept. Sitting through the same story for the fourth time without letting your face tell the truth. Handling the paperwork nobody else in the family will touch. That is Corban in reverse. Instead of finding a reason the resources are unavailable, you make them available. Watch also for the modern version of Corban. Nobody today declares their assets consecrated to a temple. But plenty of us carry a schedule so full of good and important things that nothing is left over and the parent gets whatever remains, which is usually nothing. The loophole in Mark 7 looked respectable. Ours usually does too. Does honoring a parent mean doing whatever they say, forever, regardless of what they ask? Scripture says no, and it says so clearly without weakening the commandment. Jesus, at 12 years old, stayed behind in the temple while his parents traveled a full day toward home. When Mary found him and asked why, he answered that he had to be about his father's business. Luke then tells us he returned to Nazareth and lived in submission to them for years. Both things are true at once. A claim from God can override a parent's plan, and honor continues anyway. Family sits high. It does not sit highest. And then the harder case, which would be dishonest to write around. Some people watching had a father who terrorized them. Some had a mother who should never have been trusted with a child. The Bible does not hand you a rule that puts you back inside danger. Wisdom is allowed here. Sometimes it takes the shape of distance. What honor looks like in that situation runs quieter. refusing to let bitterness define you, declining to speak of them with contempt to everyone who will listen, praying for a person who never prayed for you, doing what can be done safely from whatever distance protects you, and leaving the rest with the God who saw all of it and has not forgotten. The commandment was spoken to adults standing at the edge of a land they had not yet entered, holding the future of a nation in their hands. God told them how to keep it. Give your father and your mother weight. Let them count. Feed them. Defend their dignity. Speak of them as though they matter. Refuse to make them light. He did not make the command conditional on how good your parents were. He did not attach an escape clause for difficult families, and every family in that camp had its share of difficulty. The instruction assumes flawed people on both sides of the relationship and asks for weight anyway. Every one of us was carried by somebody before we could walk. The commandment simply asks what happens when the carrying has to go the other direction. If this study gave you something worth keeping, subscribe so the next one finds you. Drop a comment below with one thing you wish you had said to a parent, or one thing you are glad you did. Share this with someone who is in the middle of this right now because they may need it more than anyone. God bless you.